Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by showing exactly what I've been up to in my own allotment, my own kitchen garden here in Littlehampton on the south coast of the UK. Now, coming up this week, I've got a bit of an update from the kitchen garden where I've been tackling quite a few little jobs. Added to that, I've also been down on the allotment where I've been making plans for the jobs that I want to do throughout the winter months. And finally, as you're probably aware, it is now the beginning of autumn officially. We are at the end of September. Leaf has started to fall all over the place, and that leaf fall is a fantastic resource, one that I make the most of every year. So that's all coming up today. So without much ado, let's get into it. While I'm sat here in the kitchen garden, looking out across my garden, as always, there's so much veg still growing. It sometimes doesn't hit me until I sit here and really look at what I have. I'm looking across, we've got kale, we've got turnips, we've got radicchio, we've got beetroot, we've got parsnips, we've got leeks, we've got Mould, we've got spinach, we've got cabbages, cauliflowers, broccoli, we've got Brussels sprouts, basically lots and lots of different vegetables, and that doesn't even include all the fruit plants that I also have growing all over the place. However, this week I have found the kitchen garden to be a bit of a challenge. I don't know what's come over me this week, but I've sort of entered out into the kitchen garden and have really sort of gone or thought, where do I start? What do I need to do? And this is weird. This is really weird feeling for me because normally I don't get so lost. Normally I have a very, very clear plan of what I want to do. But I think the way this year has been for me, I've just felt a little bit lost. Admittedly, I haven't cut the grass for quite a while, so the grass is getting a bit long, and I think that might be half my trouble because it just looks messy when the grass is long. Now, one of the first things that I did decide to do was to start clearing away any spent crops, any spent summer crops. And this is bit of a challenge really, because how do you know they're spent? How do you know they're not going to produce any more? And this is always a bit of a challenge. For example, tomatoes. I've got plenty of tomatoes growing in my greenhouse and outside, and we've picked loads and loads of tomatoes off them this week, as we've done for many weeks. But they're still growing, they're still looking healthy, and they still could continue to grow lots of tomatoes. So I'm not going to clear those away just yet. It would be things like peas and beans that basically they've finished producing. The stems and the leaves have started to go brown. I've basically cut those off at ground level, leaving the roots in the ground as I always do, and taking the rest to the compost bin. Now, one of the key points I've said there is that I leave the roots in the ground. This is something that I always do. When we leave the roots in the ground, it encourages the roots to rot down in place. A little bit of compost, adding the nutrients into the ground. In the case of legumes, also adding nitrogen into the soil as well. But it also helps just break up that soil. Also helps aerate the soil at the same time. And at the moment, one of the big things that I'm really pushing for is to encourage healthy soil. Big thing of mine. It's always been the case. I've always done no-dig gardening, when I basically constantly layer in compost on top of the soil in order to keep feeding the soil. But looking after the soil at the moment is a big thing. The healthier the soil is, the better the soil is, the better plants we will have in the long run. So constantly trying to think about how we can constantly feed our soil and improve our soil. One of the things that I have been doing is, as you know, compost. Making enough compost is always a challenge. We got it here at home, but what I always do is whenever I have emptied a pot or a seed tray that I've pricked out all the plants and I've got this leftover compost. I've put it into a bucket, and that bucket has built up throughout the year. And I take that bucket and I smother that over some of the empty soil that we have before I plant in it. Now that compost probably has used up quite a bit of nutrients just through the seedling process, but what it does do is it just helps when we add it into the soil. It creates that mulch, it creates that organic matter that again goes on to feed our soil. So I think it's safe to say that we are now being in autumn, that our summer crops are coming to an end, and we're heading more into our autumn and winter crops. And I'm certainly finding that leafy greens are making a big batch of this. As I said, I've listed all the mizuna, the spinaches and things like that we have growing, which are just full of food, full of nutrition that we are really going to enjoy. One of the most well thought of when you think of autumn crops is of course the pumpkins. For me, the pumpkins are an often overlooked food resource. We often think of them as being for Halloween, for carving, but I always grow pumpkins and I grow them for eating. And that's certainly been the case this year. I've had a couple of pumpkin plants that have grown quite happily, and this week I harvested my first pumpkin. It was only a small one. It had completely gone orange and the stem had gone brown, and it was quite a small one at that. But I don't mind that. Don't mind that at all, because it's going to be delicious. We're going to use it in the kitchen and it's going to provide us with some good food. But it's a good sign that we are now starting to get into the process of harvesting our pumpkins, our squash plants. Now the thing is with squash plants, we can store them for a very, very long time by doing very, very little. What I like to do is, as I said, I wait until the stem turns brown. I then cut that stem off, leaving as much as I possibly can onto the fruit itself. Cut that off, give it a bit of a wash, and then place it in the greenhouse for a week just to completely dry out, and then I'll store it somewhere cool, dry and dark. And for me, that is my garage. That's cool, dry and dark, and that works quite well for the storage of pumpkins, butternut squash and so on. Now the real advantage here when it comes to squashes is that it is possible to store squashes for a very long time. 6 months easy, certainly right throughout the winter months we can continually to eat these stored squashes. Just store them correctly and you can enjoy them for a very long time. Other things that we've also need to harvest before the ground really gets frozen is our root crops, beetroot, turnips, parsnips, carrots, those sort of things. Now, for me, I don't tend to harvest my parsnips until we've had a first frost, but all the others we can harvest as we require them. The reason I don't harvest my parsnips until we've had a first frost is because the frost actually makes them sweeter. So all the rest we are harvesting. Now luckily we are eating them as we go. I'm harvesting them when we need them, but any that are left in the soil, if the soil is going to get frozen, it's going to be very difficult to dig those out. So what we could do instead is harvest them, put them into a container, a box of damp sand, and that then can be placed in our garage, somewhere cool, dry and dark, where they can store for a long time. Now for me, my first frost day isn't until December, so I've got quite a while before I need to do this, but it's certainly something that as we head into October, if frosts are going to happen in your area, you may need to think about how you're going to store some of your root crops. You may need to move them into some storage. But that's the joys of this time of year. I've always said that I don't think this time of year is the end, it's the beginning. It's also a good opportunity to really see what we have to do over the winter, which tallies up with what we're going to be talking about down on the allotment in just a moment. Now in the meantime, while I head down to the allotment, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, it's the point of the podcast where I jump in and ask you to do a couple of favours for me, which help keep this podcast running. Firstly, if you would be good enough to rate and review on your podcast provider, it really helps the algorithms work in our favour. It helps us get found by more people who might also be interested in growing their own food. Best of all, only takes you a few seconds to do, but it really means the world to us. But added to that, if you are also enjoying this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. For just £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you an idea of what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Added to that, once a month you will also receive through the letterbox our monthly seed pack, and that seed pack contains a collection of seeds that I've carefully chosen to be sown in that very month. You also get a copy of our mini newspaper, which gives you a few instructions on how to grow and care for those seeds, as well as a few other tasks that you could be doing throughout the month. In my opinion, for £5 a month, it's an absolute bargain. Now, we've come into the end of September, so this week we've only sown one of the seeds, and that was winter tares, a type of green manure that I've included in September's pack. For me, green manures are a great thing to grow. I've spoken about them a lot over the last few weeks. I'm sowing a lot of them because they are part of an essential routine in my allotment. But we've also been sharing what seeds I'm sending out in October's seed pack, because that pack will be going out in the next couple of days. Now, if that sounds like something you would be interested in joining up, then please head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and sign up. We'd love to have you there. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm down on the allotment now, and when I first got down here in the morning, it was noticeably chilly, but the sun has came out now and it is actually rather nice and warm. It's quite a pleasure, but I'm certainly noticing that the mornings at the moment are getting colder and colder. We're going to have to make sure we got plenty of blankets ready to protect any of our crops that might need protecting. Now, this week we have continued on with much of what I was talking about last week, in the sense that I've been continually weeding out weeds where I need to and throwing those into the compost bins and sowing green manures in any empty spaces. Now, naturally, we want to be growing food over winter. We want to be growing food all year round, and we are. We've still got leeks, we've still got brassicas, the garlic went in last week. We're going to be doing some onions and things like that over winter. So it's only really any spaces that I'm going to have where we can't grow food that I'm sowing green manures that I spoke of last week. But I've made an interesting note with regards to both my leeks and my parsnips. Now, my leeks and my parsnips have been planted in here. Well, the parsnips went in May and the leeks June, July time. But they have been rather slow at growing, particularly the parsnips, I've noted. Last couple of weeks, however, they seem to have put on plenty of growth though. They seem to really have put on a lot more growth. I put this down to the fact that we've had plenty of rain over the last few weeks compared to the rest of the year. This is a really interesting observation again. Back at home, they've been growing away quite happily. They haven't been struggling as much as they have down on the allotment. And I put that down to lack of organic matter, lack of compost in those beds. Something I've been saying a lot this year, and certainly something that I am noting and trying to rectify as we move on forward. I really do need to get a supply of some sort of horse manure or something to bolster my supply of organic matter. Now, something else that I've noticed, in one of the empty spaces, a globe artichoke has somehow popped up. I don't know how that happened. It seems to have self-seeded, so I've dug that up and put it in a pot. I don't really want to grow a globe artichoke, but I don't want to waste it at the same time. I do have globe artichoke plants growing in the corner of my allotment, but we don't really eat the plants. We don't really eat the artichokes. So I don't really need this plant. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. It's not going to get wasted, but it's one of those plants that at the same time, I note they die in the middle of summer going into autumn and then start growing pretty soon. So it's not unusual to see it pop up at this sort of time. I've also noted that I've got a tomato plant that has got really, really big tomatoes. It's a large variety, a beefsteak variety of tomatoes. And the tomatoes on that, they are huge, absolutely huge, bigger than my hands. And I've got quite big hands. But they're not ripening. They're not turning red. They're remaining green. They're starting to turn red. I've been removing the lower leaves to try and encourage them to ripen, but they just don't seem to be ripening. Now, there's still time that they could ripen, of course, but if it does get too cold, we'll have to pick them all off and take them home and pop them in a drawer or something with a banana in order to encourage those remaining tomatoes to ripen. It's a shame because there's some really good large tomatoes and I'm really, really pleased with them, I've got to say. Just a shame they're not ripening. Now, one of the major jobs that I have actually sat down and done this week is I've just taken a seat in my allotment and I've looked out across my allotment and written a to-do list for everything that I want to do over the autumn, winter months so that I'm prepared when spring comes into place, the allotment is ready for growing. This includes things like building compost heaps, tidying sheds, tidying greenhouse, replacing the wooden panels on some beds, things like that, things that we need to do over the winter. And I literally just sat down and wrote out a to-do list. Now this tallies up with what I've been talking about a lot, where we're planning for the coming season, we're planning for the next season. I said a few weeks ago, bit of homework, sit down, draw out your allotment, draw out your kitchen garden and work out what you want to grow. Well, this is a continuation because I've worked out what I want to grow. Well, I've drawn it all out. I now need to work out what I need to do in place in order to achieve a productive year. Another compost bin is going to be a big success. I want to try and get rid of my Dalek compost bins. Things like that just sitting down, working that all out, writing the to-do list makes, in my brain anyway, makes it so much easier to plan forward. Now, added to that, I've written this all out in an app called Notion, which I use quite a bit. It's really good at writing lists and making plans and making databases. So I've made a database with a list of all these jobs. And then what I've done is I've created a timeline of when I want to get these jobs done. So things like building a compost bin, I've got to clear the area before I build it. So I put that all into a timeline. And this is going to give me the idea for the coming weeks of what I need to do. Now, I find this really useful because, one, it gives me an idea. If I just look at my timeline, I've got that in for this weekend. So what am I going to need in order to complete that? I can get the supplies ready in time. I'm organised. I'm ready to go. I also find it helps me just sort of give a bit of a brain dump, I guess you could say. It just helps focus my mind on what I need to do rather than what I think I need to do. Give me a plan. And I'm getting quite good. I've always believed that in order to be efficient on an allotment, in order to maintain an allotment easily and quickly, we need a plan. And this is my way of doing it. Just sitting down, to-do list on Notion and creating a timeline of when all these projects need to happen. I'd love to know, do you do anything similar? And if so, would you share it with me? And have you got any winter projects on your allotment that you want to do? Please do get in touch if you want to share that with me. Right, it is time now to head on home, and I will meet you back in the podding shed where we're going to discuss about leaf mould, because after all, it is autumn. In the meantime, let's find out what we've got as the recipe of the week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with my monthly recipe, and for the first time since planting my quince tree, it has rewarded me with a bumper crop. And the first thing I wanted to make with them was spiced poached quince with vanilla ice cream, so I thought I would share my recipe. I will be using the rest of the quince to make quince cheese, and I will be sharing the recipe for that as well. The quince is a beautiful fruit that you just don't see in the shops that often, and I think that's partly because it needs cooking before eating, but it really is worth the effort. You will be able to find this recipe and others on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seed to Table, Plot 13. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. For this recipe, you will need 4 large quinces peeled and de-seeded and cut into quarters, 1 litre of water, 230 grams of caster sugar, 2 lemons, 1 zested and both juiced, 1 stick of cinnamon and 3 star anise, and a tub of your favourite vanilla ice cream. Method: start by placing the water, lemon juice, lemon zest, cinnamon stick and star anise in a medium pan over a low heat and stir continually until the sugar has dissolved. Now add the quince quarters to the syrup and cover with a cartouche. A cartouche is a disc of greaseproof paper the same diameter as the pan, with a hole cut in the middle to slow and control the evaporation. Now simmer for 2 hours until the fruit is deep red and tender and the syrup has reduced. Then serve hot with ice cream, and that's the recipe done. But I will be back in a month's time for another recipe of the month.
Oh, well, that is so good to hear Chef Scott's voice once again on the podcast. And what a recipe! Something I really had not much experience with is using quince. It's one of those flavours that I know are pretty unique, but the tree can be pretty big, I guess. I haven't really looked into it, to be honest. Perhaps we need to get ourselves a quince tree and see how it fares. Now, talking of trees, this leads us nicely to something I'd want to talk about tonight. This is one of those subjects that does come around every year. Now, lately, when I'm wandering around my local area, I have noticed that there is a lot of leaf fall lately. And as we head into autumn, the ground being full of leaves, it's to be expected. But for me, those leaves are such a great resource, one that we shouldn't be wasting. Every single year, I will collect that leaf fall and I will use it in many, many ways. And this is something that I want to talk about tonight. One of the obvious things is, of course, to make a leaf mould, a type of compost. But we can also use it as a mulch. Now, in fact, I have a listener whose allotment gets a leaf delivery every single year. The council delivers a load of leaves that they can't get rid of to their allotment. And he actually fills up his bins with all these leaves in order to make a leaf mould. But then he uses the rest to lay over the beds over winter, acting as a good, strong mulch, keeping that soil warm, keeping that organic matter in the soil. It rots down over the winter and he's left with some beautiful weed-free compost at the end of it. It really is an opportunity not to be wasted. Now, unlike my listener, I am not lucky enough to get a regular delivery of leaf. I have to go and collect my own. Now, ideally, we would be collecting these all from our own gardens or allotments, but really, I don't think we really have enough trees in the average garden to make it worthwhile. I used to, when I first moved into this house, I had a sycamore tree that I did manage to do it with, but that tree was too big for our garden, so we had to get rid of it. What I do instead is I collect mine from a recreation field, a local sports field. Now, this is somewhere where those leaves are just going to be collected and thrown away. They're going to be wasted by the council. I wouldn't get any of our leaves from woodlands or parks because I feel they should be left there. That's where they really need to be. They benefit the soil in these areas and they contain insects that are hibernating or using that leaf to get through the winter as part of their local ecosystem. Disturbing those insects are just going to cause more damage in the long run. I also don't use leaves that have fallen alongside the roads. And I won't use these because I'm worried about contamination from passing vehicles. Now, this might be just me being a little bit worried because actually leaves are probably in the ideal location because they need to be shifted from where they are. Basically, I get my leaves from places where they are going to be moved, where they are a wasted resource. And now what I do when I walk Roxy, our dog, I take a bag and I just collect a few leaves on every single walk, making sure we go through recreation field or similar. Now I then take these bags and I head down to my allotment and I pour these bags into my leaf mould bins on the allotment. These are bins that I made out of some wooden battens that I cut to size and screwed together to make basically a rectangle about 50 centimetres deep, 50 centimetres wide, 1 metre high. And then all around the edge, I stapled in some chicken wire, which allows good ventilation, allows moisture to run out, and encourages these leaves to rot down. I've got 2 of these bins and we basically fill them up with all the leaves and then we just leave them to rot down. Now it's got to be said that some leaves do take longer to rot down than the others, but eventually what will become of these leaves, they've become this really light, black, crumbly compost. It's similar to what you would find on the floor of a wooded area. In fact, that's exactly what it is. There's not a huge amount of nutrients in this organic matter, but it is organic matter. It will build up good organic matter in the soil, and it's also very good to use as seed sowing compost. One of the big tips that people will use this for is they sow in parsnips. Create a drill in the ground for your parsnip seeds, throw in your parsnip seeds, and then fill it with this leaf mould. And because it's so light and crumbly, those seeds seem to be able to break through quite easily. Now the trouble is, it doesn't take very long for my 2 leaf mould bins to fill up, but they soon reduce down as they rot down. In fact, what I find when we fill up our bins with all this leaf, the volume of leaf mould we get at the end is about 1/8 of what we started with. So it compacts down quite substantially. So what I usually do is I have a few empty garlic bins as well. And once those leaf mould bins are filled up, we fill up the garlic bins. And as they reduce down, we take the leaves out of the garlic bins and add them to the leaf mould bins, freeing up those garlic bins for next year. Now, once everything is full up, it's also worth just taking some of those leaves and just applying them around the base of the fruit trees also as a mulch. Again, this leaf mould rotting down in situ will help benefit our fruit trees and give them that good organic matter. It's also worth putting some around some rhubarb crowns. It'll protect them from the extreme cold weather and encourage those to get through the winter as well. And the same with any delicate plants or anything like that you want to get through the winter. Adding leaves around will just help them. It really does have a lot of uses, but what do you do with it? Do you go and collect these leaves or do you just leave them to go to waste? Let me know. Let me know. Well, we are coming to the end of this week's podcast. And as always, I'd ask you to please rate and review on your podcast provider. Only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. Now, we've had a review coming from Lynn, and she says, "Hi, Richard. I'd like to try straw bales. What do you condition them with? Can you use chicken pellets? How long before you can plant in them? If I planted with squash, would you just plant 1 plant per bale? Thanks, Lynn." I'm going to have to do a podcast on this subject in the future because it is really interesting. It's been very, very successful for me. But what do we condition them with? I tried chicken pellets in the past. They were not high enough in nitrogen. What I have found has worked better is urea. Now, this is a soluble fertilizer that you can get from somewhere like Amazon. It's not the cheapest, but it is a very, very high nitrogen feed, and you basically sprinkle that on every couple of days for a fortnight, watering every day, and that then means that those straw bales are conditioned. So it takes about 2 weeks to condition them. You could plant squash in them. You could probably get away, depending on the squash plant, 2 squash plants per bale. But there's a lot of experimentation still going on. As I said, I've been very successful with chilies, tomatoes, etc. in these as well. So I will cover this in detail in the future. But basically it starts with this urea. I know it's not a very pleasant thought, but it's something to go and get your hands on. It's pretty cheap. I'll add a link in the show notes if you are interested. Now, if you have enjoyed this podcast and want to help us support the work that we do, please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Details on that at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. While you are on our website, you can leave us a voicemail just by clicking on the link that records a voicemail directly to our website. You can, of course, also leave us a comment on the bottom of a blog post. You can also email me, richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, and of course, you can find me on social media. Please do give us a like and follow. Don't forget to join our Facebook group as well. I think that just about covers everything. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.